My name is Clara Evans, and I still remember the night my family told me to step away. It was almost midnight in Boston, the kind of winter night where the cold rattles the windows and the street outside feels deserted. My phone buzzed on the table, a group text blinking at me like a neon sign, Clara. We think it's best you step away for now. No greeting, no explanation. Just a verdict typed out by people who had built their lives on numbers and yet seemed to have no sense of value. I didn't write back with questions or outrage. I typed a single word, understood. Then I closed the message and opened my laptop. The bank portal asked for my codes and confirmations. My hands were steady. Within minutes, I initiated the transfer of my share $4.2 million out of the family investment fund and into my personal account. A green check mark appeared on the screen, simple and decisive, as if the universe had stamped it approved. I rinsed my glass, turned it upside down to dry, and tried to let the silence of the house settle around me. But at 2:15 in the morning, the calls began. My phone buzzed against the table like a trapped insect, one call after another. By sunrise, there were 89 missed calls stacked beneath that single message, "Step away." I had stepped, but not the way they thought. I hadn't disappeared, I had moved my ground, and in doing so, I shifted theirs. The morning after felt strangely quiet, as if the whole city had decided to lower its voice while I sorted through the wreckage of the night before. Boston's winter light had that sharp silver edge that makes everything look cleaner than it really is. I poured coffee into the same mug I had used for years and leaned against the window, watching people shuffle down the street with scarves up to their noses. Their worlds moved on. Mine had split open. My phone was littered with calls from my father, from Uncle Jonathan, from Lucas. He had sent messages that looked more like taunts than attempts at conversation. "Niece moved, Dad's furious, hope you're proud." I put the phone face down again. It was too early in the day to feed on their panic. The truth was, I had been living in their shadow for so long that finally stepping out felt like sunlight I didn't want to block. I thought about the years I had poured into Evans Wealth Group, the firm that carried our name like a badge of honor but treated me like an understudy. I was the one who stayed late to clean up models, to double-check compliance, to dig through data, until numbers told a story worth selling. Yet when the time came to present, someone else always carried the slides into the boardroom. I told myself that patience was the price of respect, that if I worked hard enough, eventually my turn would come. But patience turned into years, and years turned into invisibility. The last straw hadn't been the text. It came weeks earlier during a dinner where Lucas raised his glass and thanked me loudly for being the family's cleanup crew. Everyone laughed, even my father. I smiled too, because what else could I do in that moment? But inside, I burned. Later that night, I opened my laptop and reread the agreements I had made. The family signed documents that outlined each member's rights to withdraw their portion of the fund with proper notice. I had sent my notice months earlier, buried in emails they never cared to read. They had ignored me then. They couldn't ignore me now. Still, I wasn't without allies. My Aunt Evelyn had always paid attention. She was quieter than the rest, more deliberate, the kind of person who noticed when credit wasn't given. A few times, she had slipped me a word of recognition. "I know that was your work, Clara, and those crumbs of acknowledgement had kept me from starving." But she alone couldn't shift the culture of a family that thought merit was inherited, along with shares of the company. I had been preparing for years. Every bonus I earned, every consulting fee from clients who sought my advice privately, I directed into my portion of the fund. At night, when the office lights were off and the city hummed outside my window, I worked on something that belonged solely to my own models, my own algorithms, my own approach to risk. I filed patents, quietly kept meticulous records, and built the skeleton of what would become Clara Evans Capital. That morning, as I sat with my coffee cooling in my hands, I realized I wasn't shaken by what had happened. The message that was supposed to exile me had simply confirmed what I already knew: they didn't see me. And maybe they never would. But I had built a door out. All I had to do was walk through it. Sandra's voicemail chimed mid-morning, her voice a familiar lifeline. I assume chaos is raining down on you. Come to the Cape. Walk it off. Don't answer them until you're ready. I smiled for the first time since the text. Sandra was more than a friend. She was a lawyer who spoke the language of boundaries as fluently as I did. If anyone could remind me I wasn't insane for drawing the line, it was her. I pulled out a weekender bag, slipped my patent filings and copies of my withdrawal notice into a folder and zipped it shut. Before leaving, I took one last look around my apartment, the books stacked on the coffee table, the wine glass still leaving its faint halo on the wood, the curtains pulled just slightly to one side. It was my space, my sanctuary. Soon, it would also become the place where the entire family would have to face me on my terms. But for now, it was simply home, and I locked the door with a calm hand. Sandra's car was waiting at the curb, engine idling a blue wagon with a dented bumper she never bothered to fix. I climbed in and let the warmth of the heater wash over me. She glanced at me sideways, red scarf wrapped around her neck, eyes sharp with curiosity. On a scale of 1 to hurricane, how bad, she asked as she pulled into traffic. They'll tear the roof off if the bank doesn't move fast, I said. Her lips twitched. The bank won't bend. Compliance doesn't care who your father is. You know that. I nodded, grateful for her bluntness. The city slid past us, brownstones, giving way to warehouses, then to bare trees lining the highway. I told her about the texts, the 89 missed calls, the silence I gave in return. She told me about cases she'd handled where people claimed ignorance of documents they'd signed with their own pens. Intentions fade, she said. Signatures don't. By the time we reached the Cape, the Atlantic stretched wide and blue, the air raw with salt. Sandra's cottage was small and square, its windows facing the restless ocean like eyes that had seen too much but refused to close. Inside, it smelled of cinnamon and cedar. We brewed tea and wrapped ourselves in blankets, sitting by the wide window as waves lunged at the shore and pulled back again. I don't want to rehearse speeches all weekend, I admitted. I just want to think. Sandra tapped her mug against mine. Then let's lay the foundation. You withdrew funds that belonged to you, documented under the agreement. The bank froze the broader accounts for fraud review. That's on them, not you. The family is panicking because they relied on you without respecting you. That's the entire story. Her clarity steadied me. I told her about my late nights, the algorithms, the patents, the clients who had chosen me specifically. I confessed how many times I'd felt invisible at the family firm and how each insult had pushed me further toward building something that couldn't be erased. Sandra listened without judgment. You built your own ground, she said finally. Now you get to decide who stands on it. That night, I slept in her spare room, wrapped in a quilt patched with seashell fabric, lulled by the steady rhythm of waves. For the first time in months, my dreams weren't crowded by spreadsheets or boardrooms. I woke with sunlight in my eyes and the faint sense of peace that comes from knowing the world will spin, whether or not you answer the phone. Of course, the phone still buzzed. When I checked a voicemail from my father, waited. His voice was tight-strained, older than I remembered. Clara, we need to talk. You've caused an issue with the bank. Call me back. Nothing more. No apology. No acknowledgement of me as his daughter. Just the crisis he wanted me to solve. Later that afternoon, Evelyn called. She didn't waste words. I kept the email you sent months ago, she said. The one with your withdrawal notice. I made sure it was archived properly. I know they'll pretend they never saw it, but it's there. I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. Thank you. They're frantic, she continued. The real estate closing is Monday morning. Without your share visible, they can't complete it. They're planning to meet with you tomorrow. At your apartment. My stomach tightened. They want to corner me in my own home. They want to look you in the eye, Evelyn corrected gently. Then after a pause, it's also where you're strongest. Don't underestimate that. I stared out at the restless ocean foam gathering like lace along the sand. Fine, tell them 7 o'clock. After I hung up, Sandra raised an eyebrow. Tomorrow, I confirmed. If they want to see me, they'll see everything. We spent the evening preparing. I connected my laptop to the living room TV and loaded slides I'd built for myself, not for them. Performance charts, patent filings, contracts with client signatures. I organized the folders on the table, each labeled neatly with my name. Then I practiced speaking aloud, not as if I were asking for permission, but as if I were telling the truth carved in stone. Driving back to Boston the next day, the sun was low, the city skyline sharp against a pale winter sky. My apartment greeted me with its familiar warmth. I set the folders on the dining table, where the wine glass ring still lingered faint and stubborn. I left it there. It felt like proof that something had rested, then lifted, leaving behind only its outline. At exactly 7 o'clock, the knock came. It wasn't tentative. It was firm, like they owned the right to stand on my threshold. I opened the door to find them all gathered in the hallway, my father at the front, jaw clenched. Uncle Jonathan behind him, hands shoved into his coat pockets. My mother with her lips pressed into a thin line. Lucas leaning back on his heels with that smug grin he wore like armor. And Evelyn at the end, her eyes meeting mine in silent encouragement. I hung up their coats one by one and gestured toward the dining room. My apartment had never felt smaller. The folders on the table were stacked neatly, my laptop already connected to the television. They filed in, hesitant at first, then took seats as if we were in a boardroom rather than my home. My father spoke before anyone else. "The bank froze our accounts because of your withdrawal," he said, his tone clipped. "Tomorrow's closing is in jeopardy. Do you understand what you've done?" I sat across from him, spine straight. I understand perfectly. And I also understand it was my legal right. Jonathan leaned forward, palms open. "Clara, no one's disputing your rights. We're saying the timing hurts all of us." Lucas gave a low laugh. "Hurts all of us. Hurts Dad, you mean? She wanted attention, and here we are. Congrats, Clara. You've got the spotlight." I turned to him slowly. "Attention isn't what I want. Respect is." He smirked. "Respect is earned." "Exactly," I said. "Let's talk about the earning." I picked up the remote and clicked. The TV screen came alive with the logo of Clara Evans Capital. A graph appeared, my fund's performance line steady and rising above the family firm's more erratic results. Silence settled over the room, heavier than any accusation. "I built this," I said. "Clients signed agreements with me directly. My models are protected by patents. My results are documented. For years, I've contributed without acknowledgement, and that ends tonight." I advanced the slides, contracts, with client signatures, patent certificates, performance data. My father adjusted his glasses, a gesture I'd known since childhood, the one he used when he wanted time to think. "We aren't questioning your ability," he said. "But why sabotage the family?" In the process, I didn't sabotage anything, I answered. I enforced boundaries. The bank acted according to its own rules. Lucas slapped a hand against the table. "Enough with the speeches. What do you want? Money, a title? Just say it." I opened a folder and slid a document across the table. Evelyn picked it up first, eyes scanning quickly. "It's a bridge loan," she said. $5 million at market rate secured by receivables. 3-month term. Professional, not personal. "That's blackmail," Lucas snapped. "It's business," I replied evenly. "You can decline. You can try to find another lender tonight. Or you can postpone tomorrow's closing and explain to your partners that you lost a deal because of a text message." My mother looked down at the tablecloth, her fingers fidgeting. Jonathan shifted uncomfortably. My father took the document, reading every word, his expression carved from stone. When he finished, he looked at me across the table. "What else do you want?" I clicked again. The next slide listed 3 points, simple and bold. A new division under my leadership. Voting rights tied to capital and performance, not bloodline. Legal recognition of my intellectual property with licensing terms set by me. Jonathan sputtered, "You can't expect us to rewrite governance in one night." "I expect you to acknowledge reality," I said. "I've already been acting as a principal. It's time the title matches the truth." Lucas rolled his eyes so dramatically, it almost looked rehearsed. "This is ridiculous. If you wanted to prove something, you could have just posted your returns online." "Enough," Evelyn said sharply, her voice cutting through the room like a blade. "She's right and you know it." The silence that followed was thick. My father pressed his fingers against the bridge of his nose. Finally, he exhaled. We'll take the loan. We'll meet next week to discuss the rest. No, I corrected. The offer expires at 10 a.m. You have until then. His eyes met mine. There was something new in them, not warmth, not yet, but recognition. He picked up the pen, signed the document with a steady hand, and slid it back across the table. The ink pressed deep into the paper, leaving an imprint beneath. I'm not your enemy, Clara, he said quietly. I know, I answered, but I am my own advocate. They gathered their coats in silence. Evelyn squeezed my hand before leaving. Lucas muttered under his breath words I didn't bother to catch. My father lingered a moment longer, then nodded once before stepping out. When the door closed, the apartment exhaled with me. The TV screen still glowed with my name. I turned it off and sat alone in the quiet, the signed paper before me, the halo from the wine glass still faint on the table. For the first time, I felt the ground beneath me was entirely mine. The next morning dawned pale and sharp, the kind of Boston winter light that made everything look honest. I woke early, not because of nerves, but because sleep no longer weighed me down. For the first time in months, my body didn't carry that invisible armor of tension. I brewed coffee, let the steam rise in slow curls, and sat at the table where the contract from last night still lay. The imprint of my father's pen pressed into the paper was visible even from across the room. At 8:30, the first email came. The bank had completed its review and released the family's accounts. 10 minutes later, another email arrived confirming the closing was back on track. The deal that had seemed so urgent, so fragile, was suddenly steady again. My family would sigh with relief, but I didn't feel regret for being the reason it had trembled. The tremor had been necessary. At 9 o'clock sharp, my phone rang. My father's name filled the screen. I hesitated, then answered. His voice sounded worn, like an old violin string stretched too tight. It's done, he said. The closing went through. I'm glad I told him. The project will create jobs. That matters. There was a pause. I could hear him breathing, searching for words. We'll schedule the governance meeting Wednesday. Evelyn will chair. You'll have the documents tomorrow. Thank you, I replied. I'm not thanking you, he said, though his tone wasn't harsh. I'm acknowledging reality. Sometimes they're the same thing, I said softly. A small sound escaped him, almost a laugh, but not quite. Your mother was worried you were alone. I'm not, I said. My eyes drifted to the folders, stacked neatly to the faint halo from the wine glass still etched into the wood. I'm with myself. That's enough. We ended the call there. No warmth, no closing sentiment, but also no denial. That was progress in its own way. Later that day, Amanda called from her dorm. Her voice was full of energy, the background noisy with laughter and slamming doors. Is it true? She asked without preamble. Did you really take the money and make them sit down? I did, I said. And I'm okay. I want to be like you when I grow up, she blurted. Then quickly, not exactly you, but brave like you. I smiled, sitting on the stoop in the thin winter sun. Brave is just the word people use afterward, I told her. Before you do it, it just feels like choices. Her laugh was light, the kind that catches in your chest. I'm proud of you, she said softly, before hanging up. On Wednesday, I walked into the glass-walled conference room where the governance meeting was held. Evelyn sat at the head, composed and calm. The documents were printed, neat stacks waiting like verdicts. The changes were clear, a new division under my leadership, voting rights tied to contribution and performance, explicit protection of my intellectual property. Lucas argued, of course. He raised his voice, called it unfair, tried to frame me as power-hungry. But every objection sounded weaker against the signed contract sitting in front of my father. Jonathan tried to broker compromises, but Evelyn's steady hand kept the meeting on track. In the end, one by one they signed. Lucas scrawled his name angrily, his initials jagged. My father's signature came last, slower, deliberate, as if he wanted the ink to mean more than words. When the meeting ended, the others filed out quickly, but my father lingered by the door. His hands were buried deep in his coat pockets, his eyes fixed on the floor before finally meeting mine. I should have listened sooner, he said quietly. I should have seen you sooner. I held his gaze. You see me now. His expression shifted the lines on his face, rearranging into something almost tender. I'm proud of you. He admitted the words heavy, as if they had been waiting for years to be said. For a moment, I saw not the man who ignored me in boardrooms, but the father who once ran beside me as I wobbled on a bicycle, who had let go only when he knew I could balance. That memory softened the air between us. I'll see you next week, he said, and then he was gone. I walked out into the crisp afternoon with the new documents tucked under my arm. The city sounded the same, sirens, bus brakes, children laughing, but something in me had shifted. The ground I walked on no longer belonged to them. It belonged to me. Respect is not inherited like money in a trust. It is built, claimed, and defended, even when it means standing alone. My family told me to step away, and I did, but not into silence. I stepped into the foundation I had been laying in secret for years, each document, each late night, each decision, a brick in the ground that now holds me steady. We still gather for dinners where someone talks too long and the potatoes go cold. We still argue about trivial things that feel monumental in the moment. But when I sit at the table now, I sit as myself, recognized, unhidden, unshaken. The night they tried to move me off the board, I didn't fall. I shifted the board beneath them. The calls eventually slowed, but my work did not. And the respect I gained is the kind that endures because it was earned, not given. Thank you for watching. If you enjoy these family drama and revenge stories, please subscribe and join me for more every day.